Okay, well, welcome back after lunch. We'll be getting started with our student panel. I did realize one of the things I always forget to do is thank everybody that's been involved in making an event like this happen. So I will briefly thank my co-organizers, Dean Richard Aram and Duncan Pritchard, and the Cove for letting us host, the Cove's team and staff back there for all the tech, and Amanda just walked out, but Amanda from the Chancellor's office for helping coordinate with the logistics and making sure there was food and all of that. So a lot of people behind the scenes. I probably forgot someone, but I wanted to take the time to do that. I'm incredibly excited right now to have our student panel. I think this is really important. You can't talk about teaching in the 21st century if you don't hear from the students. So I'm going to let the four of them introduce themselves. I have a couple quick questions, and then I'm going to open to questions from the audience.
Cool. My name is Katerina Shek. I'm a double major in Russian Studies and International Studies. I have a conflict analysis and resolution minor, and I'll be graduating this quarter, so 16 more days.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny Attia. I'm a fourth year physics major. I'll be graduating in the spring. I'm a learning assistant for physics and also a learning assistant mentor.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a third year mechanical engineering student. I currently work at Student Success Initiatives. I'm a peer educator.
Hello everyone, my name is Marvin. I'm a fourth year human biology major and I have a minor in the medical humanities, and I'm also a senior, so I'll be graduating next quarter.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the slightly negative question. And it's not necessarily negative, but what aspects of college courses either surprised you the most or you felt unprepared for coming in from high school into college? And Marvin, why don't we start and put you on the spot since you're the farthest away from me?
All right, so I would say one of the most surprising parts of college is just how big the classrooms are and how intimidating it can feel for like an individual to try to navigate like the class and like take advantage of the resources. So as a freshman biology major, a lot of the courses are at most 400 students, so it can feel very difficult to really engage with the matter. But I've seen over the course of my time here at UCI that there have been a lot of active learning initiatives to promote that active learning and facilitate collaboration among different people.
I think for me, coming in as a freshman, the number one thing that surprised me was, other than the big classrooms like many students, was the syllabus. So, I saw how much percentage weight each exam would be, and the final seeing it to be 40%, 45%, I think that was the biggest surprising thing. And I think till now, I haven't gotten used to it. It still like weighs on me, and I'm just like, oh my God, I really have to grind on these exams. Like everything rides on them. And to this day, that would be the main one.
For me, it would have to be the accountability. The first class I took at UCI, the distribution for the grade was just 50% final and 50% midterm. So there was no homework required, but it was recommended. So, essentially you had to do the homework in order to pass, but they wouldn't be graded. So it was kind of on the student for like their responsibility to do the homework on their own and understand the material. And for me, that was a huge change from high school where there was due dates and like, oh, you have to get this done, But yeah, for me, it was just mostly the responsibility.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, the thing that shocked me the most was that I actually have to do the reading, which is like, at first was ludicrous to me. Like I just always had listened to the lectures and absorbed the material that way. So when, I'm actually a transfer student, I should preface this by saying that I did not come into UC Irvine as a 17 or 18-year-old student. I took a gap year after high school that actually turned into about 3 years, and I was living abroad and got a lot of life experience before I went back into a junior college and transferred to UC Irvine. So trying to think back 5 years ago about what was surprising or shocking to me is quite difficult because I had been living abroad and there was a lot of things that were quite shocking about that. But definitely the fact that, yeah, there's a lot of accountability in college courses. I've only had a few that were larger, like 100 plus person lectures, and I do second or sort of echo that sentiment that it's really easy to feel like just a number when you're in those large classes, and I feel very lucky that I've only had a few of them. And I think that that's where the sort of accountability or the pressure being on yourself to almost learn on your own or to self-teach the material to yourself is challenging, and I will probably never be able to figure out a way that is efficient when you're in those kinds of courses.
Excellent. So on the other side, what are some of the most effective things you feel you've experienced in courses to help you with your learning, or maybe something you hear your friends talk about that sounds very effective that you would have liked to have in one of your classes? And let's start, Katerina, if you're okay, at this end, because Marvin already alluded to active learning, so we'll make him go last.
Right, and I'm actually really glad that you did, because I was going to build off of that as well. I have taught in the Writing Center in my junior college. We had a program where we worked embedded in remedial English courses. So before being in LA here at UC Irvine, I had already had experience with it. And I think in those environments, I learned how important peer-to-peer learning is. And again, how much you sort of miss out on that when you're in those huge lectures.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree the peer-to-peer learning. For one of the most effective strategies I've seen in a class that I took myself, the professor essentially lectured for nearly half of the class, and then the rest of the time we got into groups and he posed questions to the whole class, and we kind of talk about them and throw ideas off of each other. And what I really liked about that was that all the material was fresh in our minds. So we just had the lecture, and then we immediately got to talk about it and like throw ideas off of each other. And I really liked that because if it was just a lecture for 50 minutes and we'd go home, no one would study right after. Absolutely no one. You just go home and do whatever you want, or you have other stuff to attend to. But like forcing you, like the students, to sit down and talk about the material you just learned, I think really ingrains the knowledge in them. So.
I had a very similar experience as Danny, very effective, and in that same class. So what happens in those really big lectures is that, there are 200 other students, and it's very hard to kind of feel encouraged to speak up, raise your hand, without feeling intimidated. I know for me, I'm not one to participate in those big lectures, but when it comes to discussions, it's very easy. But I think one of the cool things that one of my professors did is that it was my first time seeing it, where she used a poll everywhere, or a sort of like participation program where like, okay, I'm gonna post a question and then you have the ability to answer it on your own. And then on top of that, she allowed us to discuss it with whoever was near us. And I think just having that like opportunity to speak with other students, hearing what they had to say about the subject, about the topic, really helps us remember or recall from previous materials from that same day, or whatever, and it just like reinforces overall.
I think from what I've observed, the classes that I've really benefited the most were from the peer-to-peer collaboration, as well as a professor who promoted that structure for explaining why peer-to-peer collaboration is very important. From my experience as a learning assistant, I've noticed that some of the lower division courses, there's still a disconnect as to what the purpose of the learning assistants are, and why are we breaking down the lecture in a certain way. Why are we having people talk to each other during certain topics? And from the courses that I've seen LA's use very well, the professor was able to explain exactly why learning assistants were very important, and to continually reinforce the idea that you learn with other people and you learn from other people.
Okay, now we get to make you all powerful. So you're completely in charge of the university system, and you have magic powers. What would you want as we continue to move forward in the 21st century, and the theme of the conference, teaching in the 21st century? What do you think faculty, students should be thinking of and exploring and trying next, or just doing more of that we're already doing? And I'll let whoever wants to go first go.
So I was actually thinking about this, like as Marvin was talking, because as a CLAP mentor, I have to observe other learning assistants. And one of the classes I observed, the professor essentially lectured for a few minutes and then posed a question and then lectured and posed a question in this very structured design for the course. And I thought that was very interesting, instead of just lecturing for a certain longer periods of time and then posing a bunch of questions to these students. Because I haven't taken a class like that myself, but I would be interested to see if that was actually effective in terms of teaching smaller topics or concepts and then immediately having the students discuss them. So that way, every concept that you learn, you can immediately talk about with your peers right after. And I think that would be interesting to explore.
I was reading through the website what the different talks were, and one of the keynote speakers, I think, was talking about giving space to fail. And I think that that's extremely important, not only for the student, but for any person on the instructional team, whether it's the instructor or the learning assistant or the TA. We are just humans, and we don't know everything. And I think creating a sort of, not a safe space, but more, I'm also an intern on campus for the Olive Tree Initiative, and something that we do is called a lab space. And it's just a space where a student is sort of able to speak very freely and give their own opinions, maybe on a very controversial topic, and they just word vomit, sort of, and nobody's really allowed to criticize them, but we engage in a discourse in that way. So the person isn't afraid to be wrong because they know that they won't be attacked. And I think that that's an important part of learning, is not being afraid of being wrong. So I want to just emphasize and underline that creating a space for everybody to fail, and that it's accepting to fail, that's extremely important. And we should shift the paradigm away from being right or getting the right answers on the tests to something that is more of a lab space.
I think for me, considering what I said earlier about how these exams are worth a lot of our grades, I think kind of thinking about how a student may feel and the pressure that comes with that, and maybe I took a course where it was the first midterm was 20%, I believe, and then the second midterm was 25, and then so on with other stuff. But that just made me want to focus more in the material, really learning the material, than cramming something and then forgetting about it the day after the midterm or exam. So I think that would be effective to kind of just think about that, reconsider how much percentage you put in some of these assignments. And on top of that, I think what really helped, especially with my engineering classes, is when the professor connects what he or she is talking about to the real world. So really seeing that happening is okay, so I could potentially see myself in an industry like this, or continue research in the stuff that we lack in currently, or what can I do more in the future. And so it's really cool to see that.
Yeah, I definitely love the points brought up earlier, where creating a space to fail, to make mistakes, is very important for learning. That's totally part of the learning process, as well as creating a space to understand the relevance of what you're learning to the real world. I think to add on to that, some of my favorite courses at UCI have been courses where we've been able to create our own knowledge, engage in creative projects that tie in the material to our own unique interests. So I've been a part of Humanities Core and Sustainable Societies, and both of those courses really emphasize group work, collaboration, as well as creating your own projects. And the creation of a project really does help you reflect on not only what do you know from the text, but how can you take what you've learned and make it actionable and take it away into society. And I think for education in the 21st century to move it forward, we want our students to realize that the education that they're learning here is beyond a grade, but it is something that they can use with them in their different career paths and to improve society.
Awesome. Well, on those exciting notes, do we have questions from the audience? And I remind you to just please come up to a microphone since we are recording. So questions for the students. And don't feel bad, no one ever stands up and asks questions.
Maybe we just covered the material so well.
I know.
Don't have questions.
Thank you both. Thank you all for being here. And I'd really like to hear from you as students from very different majors and educational backgrounds, one particularly memorable experience. You've all talked about project learning or hands-on learning. Tell us about a particular project, please.
That's a really difficult and sort of broad question, and I think it's hard for me even to just choose one. I think my work with the Olive Tree Initiative, which for those of you who aren't too familiar, it's a conflict analysis group here on campus. It actually started at UCI, and if you want the whole elevator pitch, come talk to me afterwards, because I think we only have 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But kind of taking it back to the Space to Fail, I think that that organization taught me a lot about how important it is to fail, and that sort of made me think that I myself am a project. So I would, to answer your question, I'm the most interesting project that I've done in college. Not to be like, it's not like a narcissistic thing or whatever, but I think that through that organization and through their models of teaching and experiential learning, it really taught me that I am a project as a human being who is, in academia, who's living in this world. I am a project, and I am always continuing to grow, and I'm always continuing to learn, even if I'm learning by teaching or whatever. I'm a project. I hope that answers your question.
Excellent. Anyone else?
I think for me, the most memorable project I worked on was part of my writing class to fulfill the upper division writing requirement here. So it was a class where everyone got into groups of 2 people, and then we'd work on 2 to 3 projects throughout the whole quarter. But the final project was kind of like the biggest one, and it was the most intimidating, or so it seemed. But me and my partner really got to know each other, and we became really good friends due to that class. But by the time the final project came around, we had gotten to such a good chemistry in terms of working on projects together and just hanging out all the time, that we breezed through the final project. And it got to the point where we were helping other groups also finish the project. And I just really enjoyed that specific project because I know problem solving and just troubleshooting and all that was extremely exciting for me. But I just enjoyed the fact that we worked together so well that we could help the other students as well. And I think that was for me the most memorable experience.
I would say the most memorable for me, it was kind of hard to recall them because my first 2 years, a lot of it was just sitting in class, listening to the professor, sitting in class, forgetting what he or she said, and tuning in back and forth. But I think the most recent one that I can recall was last quarter. It was for a mechanics of structures class. It was a lab, so it wasn't even the actual class. And we were assigned this project that it was a lab experiment we had to do, and I had to do some stuff. We all distributed the work, and I had to solder a couple of things because one of my teammates couldn't. So it was cool for them to be comfortable enough to tell me what to do, and then kind of just helping each other out. But then at the very end, one of our teammates broke it, and the lab report was due the next day, and so it was we were in this state of panic, right? And it was really nice because we told the discussion leader, we were hey, this happened. What can we do? And he was very nice about it. He was okay, so I understand. I was here throughout it all, so I saw you guys do the work, and what I can say now is try your best in completing the lab report. but also gather data from another group and see what you can do with that. But just like make sure in the lab report that you say that you got that information from another. So I think that was like overall an interesting experience because you know, that discussion leader or whoever the faculty was at that moment could have easily been like, oh, too bad, like start all over again. If you're late, then so be it. But it was just really nice to have that extra support when we didn't think we needed it.
I definitely think that the role of like the professor, the teaching faculty in a classroom, their role is not only to teach the material, but to be very supportive of their students, not only inside the classroom, but outside of the classroom. And one of my most memorable projects is something that I'm working on today. So I'm really interested in understanding physician burnout, and I would say that it was through my courses in the medical humanities and medical anthropology that we are able to bring in our own unique interests into the classroom and not only fulfill like the project requirements asked of us, such as writing out an outline or writing out a narrative, but having that close support and interaction with the professors who were very supportive and very engaging with our research interests, that overall has helped me like complete work on the project as well as complete work on the project as well as complete work towards the classes. So I think having that space to realize that your education can really mean something beyond a grade is really important.
Okay, since we're getting near time and people were not rushing up to ask questions, I'm going to ask kind of one closing question to wrap it up. Imagine you are now getting to do the professional development for the incoming faculty to UCI this summer. So it's brand new faculty, they're here, they're excited, they've been hired at a research university. What is the one piece of advice you would give them about their teaching?
I would say not to be too focused in your research. I've seen it. Yeah, I get it, I really do. But what happened, I realized this in my second year. I was taking an engineering class, and professor was very, into his research. But what happened is when he was in class, it was like he was too focused in that, where it was like he kind of wasn't present. Not really as engaging as one would hope, especially in a lecture with 300 students. And I think that's what kind of was a reminder that this is a research university, and as much as it's really awesome, the things that you are all doing really great, but at the same time you are a sort of a mentor to us. And I think just remembering that as you go into a lecture and just giving us advice along the way, I think that's really helpful.
I would advise them, I would tell them that the best teaching and the most effective professors are the ones who teach beyond the classroom. But in a very Socratic way. I think it was Marvin who mentioned that the material should sort of connect to real life, to outside of the classroom world. But you can't do that so explicitly. It has to be something that is not contrived and something that sort of happens naturally. And that's what I mean when I say that it has to be in a Socratic way. So I would also advise these new faculty members that you can't reach all the students, and that's okay. And don't be so hard on yourself if you can't do that. You really cannot win them all, and it's okay, because it's okay to fail. It's okay for them to fail, too.
I think for me, I would emphasize listening to your students. For all my experiences of when I went to office hours, somehow the conversation always turns into the professor talking about their research. And I was not there for that at all. I just wanted help with homework or something. And so the professors that I'm most connected with are the ones that let me do all the talking, which I'm not necessarily comfortable with all the time, but it helped me the most in that way, right? If I came for a certain question, I wasn't just lectured at by this professor specifically. She let me walk through the problem and find out exactly where my misconception was on my own, and that was the most beneficial thing for me. So listening to students, I would say.
I would conclude to say that a lot of us students, we look up to you all as professors, as higher education mentors, and life gets challenging. And I think having that empathy to relate to your students and also not be too hard on yourselves or to be too hard on your students is really important. And a lot of my most valuable mentorships with professors have been through their close understanding of our situations, as well as being like productive and being also critical and helping us improve as not only students but also people beyond UCI. So having a very empathic relationship is very important.
Okay, well, thank you all so very much. I think this has been incredibly helpful. Let's thank the students. And I would just say I think this is some of the best advice I've ever heard for faculty, and it might put Andrea and Danny out of work if we let the students loose on the faculty professional development. And I would encourage all of you, remind you this is recorded, and when it's up there, you can have this be watched at faculty meetings or at other venues, and I think that could be very powerful. So thank you, students, and I'll turn it over to Richard as we transition.